Once again, welcome to this first in our seminar series. We'll start with French today. Each of our presenters will talk for about 20 minutes. Cyrille will make a start talking about stereotypes, about French, the French language and French people, and he will be looking at potential truths behind them. And then Dr. Erika Fülöp will be talking about digital culture and what that actually means and what that means for her research. As I said, please keep your microphones muted, but that does not mean we wouldn't want you to contribute. So please ask any questions you have and make any comments you would like to make in the chat. And my colleague, Chris Witter, will be monitoring the chat. And then at the end for the Q&A, he will be putting those questions to the speakers. So lastly, the last thing I would like to say is that we would really like to hear what you think about this online seminar series, and especially if there's anything, any topics you would like us to do a seminar on in the future. That's why at the very end of the session, we will give you a short link with a questionnaire. It really just takes 2 or 3 minutes just to let us know what kind of stuff you would like to see us do in the future. So now, without further ado, I'm going to pass on to my colleagues, and we'll start with Cyrille. Over to you, Cyrille.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. So we're going to start by talking about stereotypes. I'm sure that some of you may have stereotypes about the French people, and I've picked a few that I think are quite popular. And now I'm going to move on to the first slide. Okay. So what we're going to do first, we're going to try and identify some of the French stereotypes, okay? Finally, after a bit of time, about 20 minutes, we'll try and see if stereotypes are close to reality, okay? At the end, I've given you all the references I have used to complete this little task. And then if you have any questions, as Dasha explained before, use the chat, okay? Do not unmute your microphone, please. Just ask, and we'll deal with that at the end after my colleague Erika. The first stereotype that I have picked is the fact that apparently people think French people are lazy. Okay, it comes from the fact that apparently we are good at striking, and it's a national sport for us. Okay, as a matter of fact, things have changed, and the amount of people in the trade unions have been going down and down, and therefore there are actually fewer and fewer strikes year in, year out. Okay, the second fact that means French people may seem lazy is that officially we only work 35 hours every week. Most people do work more than that, okay? And finally, we also lucky enough to have 5 weeks of paid holiday every year, okay? Nevertheless, it's always pointed out by the UNESCO and other UN organizations that the productivity in French is actually quite high, okay? I'm not going to dwell into figures, but the links are available at the end, okay? Alors, just from a vocab point of view, en grève means on strike. And for those of you who know a little bit French, you will be able to understand those slides. There you go. The second stereotype that you may have is that we all wear a beret. Well, you can see that I am not, okay? But most of my colleagues will not when we are teaching French. Nevertheless, it has been extremely popular since the Middle Ages. Originally, it was worn by men and women. And why did it become popular? It's not really well known, but it was particularly popular in the south of France. And now you will find beret, a lot of beret, that is true, in the French army, as you can see on the picture on the left-hand side. All the shepherds that we have in the Pyrenees, for example, will most of the time have a beret. In that case, we will actually call them the beret basque. And also the last instance where you will see a huge amount of people wearing those berets is if you go to the feria in the south of France, like the corrida in Spain. Okay. Also, those berets being a famous French stereotypes. A lot of painters working near Montmartre in Paris will have those berets as well. The next stereotype I have picked is the fact that apparently French people always carry bread. Okay, you will have seen those pictures on the internet. You will have seen those stereotypes in pretty much all American movies. Okay, I remember the film Independence Day, for example, when you have the French shepherd, he's carrying bread under his arm. Okay, the reality is actually quite different. Okay, as you can see, Turkish people eat up to 120 kilo of bread every year. The Algerians are also over 100. Even our German neighbors eat 85 kilo of bread a year. Okay, technically, we're only the 9th nation in the world regarding bread eating, and we eat up to 58 kilo per year per person. Okay, why is that? Well, A, because the bread in France is good, and B, because we've got a huge variety, as you will be able to see on the slide I have designed for you there. You will see that we've got, for example, la boule, la marguerite. Okay, so all those breads are actually real bread. They're not made up. Okay, le pain noir, which is with chestnuts or nuts. You've got la fougasse, which is very popular in the south of France, and the one that you call la baguette, which is actually probably the most common one, which is la baguette parisienne. Okay, and it's always a pleasure when you go to France to actually try the bread because it's absolutely delicious. I would recommend it anytime. The next stereotype, sorry, the next stereotype that you may have about the French is that French people are romantic. Okay, why is that? Well, it's due to some phonemes, some sounds that we use in French. Okay, French people are not any more or any less romantic than others. This is really a huge stereotype, but it's because of the way we pronounce letters. For example, in French, we've got the U sound, which is always quite tricky to pronounce for beginners, okay, as in the word une, okay? So why is that an interesting phoneme, an interesting sound? Because when you do this sound, you actually round your lips, and this makes your face accentuate the cheekbones and evokes a sort of image of kissing. That is the reason why a lot of people, when they do what I would call duck face, but also lip face to do selfie, they do that, okay? Une, okay? It looks romantic, apparently, and it looks sexy, okay? I leave you to your opinion. According to a study by the University College of London, women... Can I just thank you. I don't know who had the sound, but thank you very much. According to a study by the University College of London, women find husky a voice and men find breathy voices the most attractive, okay? Some of the French fricatives like the j, je, and the r, the French r, as in the word rouge, mimic those qualities. So apparently, je suis rouge is a very sexy sentence for everyone, okay? French is also, that's the last point to make the French language sound romantic. French is a syllable timed language, which means that the duration of every syllable is perceived as being equal. Whereas, for example, in English, we stress some syllables, okay? Which means if you want to put a stress in French, you don't stress a letter, you lengthen the vowel, okay? And that makes it apparently more romantic. I will leave you with your opinion once again. These are stereotypes. We will talk about it in the end if you want. The striped shirt. It's true, we do wear a lot of striped shirt. Not everywhere in France, but in some areas of France. For example, the one place where you will find those stripy shirts is mainly in Brittany. In Brittany, you will have loads of people wearing this, particularly tourists. It's important to notice, okay? Those striped shirts appeared in 1810 in Brittany and in Normandy. The idea was that if a man fell into the water, it would be easier to spot with stripes, because then you would have the alternance of white and blue, okay? For that reason, it was picked to be part of the official French marine uniform, okay, in the French army in 1858. The uniform means that it is very regulated. So technically, the stripes should have 21 stripes on the body length and 15 on the sleeve. The reason why this striped shirt became extremely popular is because a lot of people thought they were very comfortable at sea. They are actually quite long because they can go below the hip, okay, almost up to the knees, which means they kept people warm. And also they're made in one piece of garment, which means there's no sewing, there's no button. Therefore, there's fewer risks of catching something on a boat and therefore falling into the water. So basically, it was for safety reasons that it became very popular. At the beginning of the 20th century, it also became extremely popular thanks to Coco Chanel, who used it in a lot of catwalk and défilé and outfits. And later again, it became more popular thanks to the Mime Marceau, or recently Jean-Paul Gaultier. I've put a picture here on the right-hand side of the défilé of Jean-Paul Gaultier, the catwalk of Jean-Paul Gaultier in Montreal when he did the show. All these are actually wedding outfits that you can see on the right-hand side. Okay. Another stereotypes is that French people drink a lot of red wine, and even pushing things as far as saying that we only drink red wine. This is not true, okay? We do love our wine, and we have a lot of wine, and most of them are good. That's why we drink a lot, okay? We are still the biggest producer in the world. We are still the biggest exporter in the world, but two countries actually beat France to drinking wine. As wine drinkers overall, the Americans are the biggest drinker in the world, okay? As red wine drinker overall, the Chinese are the biggest drinkers in the world, okay? On the map here, you will be able to see all the types of vineyard that we use according to the wine that we make, okay? You may see that the biggest production region are actually the Rhône Valley, the Bordeaux area, as you may have known before, and of course the Loire Valley as well is quite popular. Okay, not so much with red though for this map. We drink a lot of water as well. Okay, the French kiss. The French kiss. First of all, the French kiss is an American expression, okay? As you may know, French kiss is actually a particular kiss, okay, that we do not give to everyone, okay? It's quite reserved to our partners, okay? Whereas what we do a lot is la bise, faire la bise. And I've put a few pictures here, for example, of our President Emmanuel Macron kissing Angela Merkel, which is completely normal, okay? We do kiss friends, okay? We kiss family members, okay? Whether they are men, women, or children, okay? You can see that some people are quite unfamiliar with the idea of kissing, as you can see with that lovely face of Donald Trump, whom Emmanuel Macron actually forced to kiss at the last G20 summit. I don't know if Mr. Trump is enjoying that, but you can see that the bees is really have a contact, okay? Because you may have seen in some films that they actually go, no, that's not a bees, that's nothing, you're kissing the air, okay? You actually want to touch the person, okay? The bees may disappear after the coronavirus. We'll talk about that maybe later, okay? Now, when you go to France, you can't just kiss anyone like that. There are rules. For example, how many kisses do you give? Okay, I've put a map here on the left-hand side where you can see that in Brittany, for example, they give one kiss. In my region and in most of France, you'd give two kisses, one on each side, okay? Some areas in the south of France, for example, near Marseille and Lyon, you give 3 kisses, and in the region of Auxerre, okay, you actually give 4 kisses, okay? And the second difficulty is, where do you start? Do you start by kissing like that or like that? So do you start kissing on the right or on the left? Again, you've got a map showing that France is clearly divided there. You've got a vast majority starting to kiss on the right. So you go this way, okay? And only in the east, the south, and the southeast, sorry, do you kiss from the left, okay? The cheese. We are addicted to cheese, maybe, maybe not, okay? And what is important is to know that even De Gaulle had a famous quote, okay, about the fact that, alors, I will read it in French, okay, and then I will translate it. Comment voulez-vous gouverner un pays où il existe 258 variétés de fromage? He did ask completely seriously, okay, in a speech, how is it possible to govern a country where you produce more than 258 varieties of cheese? That is a good question, okay? I am personally from Normandy, and as you can see on the map, we are quite big because we have a lot of cows and we produce a lot of milk, and therefore we've got the Neuchâtel, the Pont-l'Évêque, the Livarot, and the very famous Camembert, okay? Camembert, which is actually a little town in Normandy, okay? As regarding the consumption, we may think that the French eat a lot of cheese, but as you can see in the chart there, in 2016, it's the latest data I could find, okay? Denmark, Iceland, Finland, so basically Scandinavian countries, were actually consuming more cheese than the French, okay? The French are still number 4, okay? With apparently almost 28 kilo of cheese per year per person. Okay, which is quite a treat. The 2CV. The 2CV, some of the younger people here may not have seen many of them, okay, was extremely popular from 1948 all the way to 1990, okay? When it was presented at the Salon de l'Automobile in 1948, which is the car fair in 1948, some people actually asked seriously the question, does it come with a tin opener? Est-ce que ça vient avec un ouvre-boîte? Okay. Through the years, over a period of 50 years, it sold to over 5 million, and I'm talking only in France here, okay? 5 million in the original version, which is the top one here, and 2 million in the bottom version, which is the De Chevaux Diane. Why was it so comfortable? Well, Citroën have always been renowned for the quality of their suspension. Okay, you may remember the DS with the General de Gaulle going up before starting. Okay, and basically the suspension was so comfortable that to promote the quality of their car, they actually had an advert filmed in one shot where they had put eggs on the back seat of the car and actually drove down a hill at full speed, and apparently none of the eggs were broken at the bottom of the hill. Therefore, it was completely revolutionary, and it meant that it was extremely popular. Now they're quite collectibles, okay? They're also known in England as a tin snail, and in French as a dodoche. Finally, the last stereotypes is quite interesting. Apparently, French people cannot speak other languages, okay? Well, the first reason is cultural, because films and series are dubbed in French. In a lot of countries, there are subtitles, but French people are used to having films dubbed, and we actually are lazy. We're going back to the first stereotypes when it comes to reading subtitles, and we don't like it. We prefer film dubs, okay? But things are changing. In 2008, languages were made compulsory from the age of 7, which means year 2 or year 3 in England. Okay. Then in 2010, we made the learning of 2 foreign languages compulsory in high school. Okay. And we also created European options so that people could learn a language, not just in the language classes, but also in other subjects. For example, you can, if you take the European option, you may have a math lesson in German or a history lesson in English, which is a great thing. This started in about 2000, in the year 2000, okay? And also, the reason why we are not so good at speaking languages is because we focus on the grammar rather than communication and accuracy. In a lot of countries, the aim is to be able to communicate an idea, to be able to speak, to give an idea. Whereas in the French school system, we really focus on the accuracy, which means the grammar rather than the vocabulary. So we may be good at using the grammar, but we're not so good at communicating and having a variety of lexicon. Okay. Finally, it's important to remind everyone that almost 50% of EU nationals can only speak their mother tongue. So it's not specific to France either. Okay. Now, stereotypes. Are they close to reality? Are they real? We have a saying that can be very easily translated into English: il n'y a pas de fumée sans feu. There's no smoke without fire. So obviously there is a little bit of truth there, okay? I did a little bit of research, and based on an article by Jessica Cundiff, okay, there are 2 reasons for stereotypes, okay? First, there is the stereotype threat. You feel threatened of failing to correspond to the stereotype that people have, and you comfort because you identify with the stereotypes that people give you. And therefore, when you feel threatened by the possibility of conforming to negative stereotypes, then you actually reinforce these stereotypes, okay? Ironically, okay, this concern leads to a decreased performance, okay? Therefore, people want to reinforce the stereotypes to identify with what people are expecting of them, okay? And the second one is what we call the stereotype fit, okay? And basically, it's a downward social comparison, okay? And you see your status, okay? You want to elevate yourself compared to the others, okay? And therefore, you find a lift in the performance, meaning in the stereotypes. The fact that you conform to stereotypes give you reassurance. Basically, it's all to reassure yourself. So sometimes, even though you don't want to admit the stereotypes is true, you're still doing it nevertheless. Okay, so here, if you're a bit curious, you will be able to see a little video that we will put online after the session, okay, about the stereotypes, okay? This is just to summarize what I have just said. And now I'm going to pass on to my colleague, Erika. Erika?
Yes, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me. Someone, Chris or someone, can confirm that it's all right. And I am going to try to share my screen, which is our first experiment in digital culture here. One of the characteristics of which is that it's full of surprises. So let's hope it's going to work as I expect it to work. And there you go. So normally you are seeing my screen. Is that right? I might just assume that you're seeing. So continuing a little bit from where Cyrille left it, I am also going to start with a bit of stereotypes and perhaps questioning some of the stereotypes. So this part of the session will ask, what is French digital culture? We have often an idea about the digital world, that it is homogeneous, that it's becoming everywhere the same thing. We have all we have a global culture that is everywhere, and in a way that is true, but at the same time it's not entirely true. So there is something to dig a little bit further about here. So I'd just like to start with a couple of questions, and if this was a real seminar where we could more easily interact, I would ask you to tell me, what is culture for you? What culture means for you? Perhaps for now you could just give a thought and try to formulate what kinds of things you might say to this question. What is it that you would list as part of a country's culture when you want to study it? I might need to assume here that you would list things like literature. Perhaps if you go to university, you would expect to study some aspects of history, perhaps film, perhaps music, things like that, perhaps traditions, etc. Also including things that Cyrille just mentioned. So we have to some extent stereotypical idea of what culture might be. The second question would be, what is digital for you, and what you use for your digital devices for? And just give it a thought again to yourself. What is it that you most often use your phone, your computer, your tablet, PC, etc. for? Here again, I would assume that among the first answers would be something like communication, social media, keeping in touch with friends and family, buying stuff, watching movies, listening to music. So two major categories there would be, I assume, practical things, including communication, and entertainment. If you listed something else, I will be curious to hear at the end in the discussion, what is it that you do other than this? And the last question, and this is the direction where we will be going, is where you think the two might intersect. So what would you think of when I mention digital culture? This will be the focus of my discussion today. This is part of my research. I am fascinated with where culture is going and how culture is changing under the impact of digital technologies. So a little bit of history here. I assume that some, if not many or most of you, are doing or have done some computing. So you might have an idea of how it started. I won't go back on the history of computing, but you might be aware that computers started to become available to the public from the 1970s, even though it was invented in the 40s, 50s. It became more affordable from the 80s, and from the 1990s it started to spread, and by today it's more or less an assumption that basically everyone has some sort of a digital device, a computer, a telephone, which is basically today a small computer. And indeed in the Western countries and in the developed world, that's around 90% of the population. So 9 people out of 10 will have some sort of digital device. Then another important development that would come into play when we talk about digital culture is obviously the internet. It's now almost a basic assumption that when you have a computer or a telephone, it is connected to the internet. more or less constantly. Say 20 years ago, that wasn't so obvious yet. The internet was invented in, also started to be invented in the 60s, say, but it became the standard that we know today was invented in 1974, and it was standardized in 1982. But the World Wide Web, which is the content that we most commonly use, was only created in 1989. So that's just over 30 years ago. And we can think about to what extent how this has changed the entire world we live in. It's so present in our world today that we, especially if you were born after the World Wide Web was invented, and since these devices have become part of our everyday, it's difficult to conceive what it meant not to have Google at your fingertips to answer any question that you might have at any point in your life, in your day. So just try to give it a thought what it means today and what it might have meant, to what extent it has changed culture. This should be crucial in this discussion. And of course, mobile phones were the last step, so far the last step in this development. They started spreading in the 90s, but again, they became really widely available and common from the mid 2000s, and especially today in the past 10 years, it's really exploded. So almost everyone's basic assumption have a smartphone in their hands and internet access. So this last 30, 40 years of history has fundamentally changed. What has it changed, in fact? Well, it changed the way we communicate, obviously. We don't only talk to people face to face or on the phone or by physical letters, but we communicate with people who are far away, and thankfully right now. But the impact of this is just very difficult to conceive. It is so far-reaching. And just consider the fact that if our communication changes, the way we communicate, that basically means that culture as such changes, because the basis of culture is communication. Whatever you might have thought of at the beginning when I asked that question, what culture is for you, it is always some form of communication that is at its basis. Whether you think about literature, that's people writing for people. Whether you think about film, that's people telling stories through the medium of film. Or if you think about music, if you think about different habits and customs in a country, they all social habits that were born and creativity that was born emerged in society. So communication is its basis. And that's one of the famous theorists of contemporary communication, Marshall McLuhan, said, the medium is the message. We could make a whole discussion about the extent to which this is true, but there is a very basic truth in it, is that the medium through which you communicate contributes or is part of the message. So you cannot just extract the fact that now we're communicating through computers. We wouldn't be talking in the first place at the moment if it wasn't through computers. So anyway, the way we communicate very much influences the way culture is shaped. And it has, of course, through communication changed many, many things. The way we work, the way we read, the way we write, the way we perceive. If you just think of the fact that now you see a nice image, you immediately want to put it on Instagram and you tend to see it through your phone almost. Our very perception is impacted by it. The way we learn is impacted by it, not only in terms of the methods we use to learn and the materials, but also our memory, how we memorize, how attentive we are, and how long we can stay attentive. How we spend our time is obviously very strongly impacted. How much time you spend with your phone, and what would you be doing if you didn't have your phone. The way we socialize, of course, has changed. And the way we represent ourselves and other people, we very much perceive them through, and ourselves also through these devices. So these are really fundamental changes that we cannot just dismiss and not consider when we are talking about a culture, and also how language developed, since language is also our basic means of communication. So if the tools with which you communicate change, that also impact language. So it's a whole complex thing where everything impacts everything a little bit. So when I mentioned at the beginning that I wanted to question with this session also this idea of homogeneity and global world, you might have heard the expression global village, since we are connected everywhere with everyone in the world, or almost. The question arises as to what is French, or what is German, or what is Spanish, or what is Chinese in this global village? What makes that there is still something that is attached to a specific culture and that is representative of a specific culture? Well, we could talk a lot of things about in this respect, but I will just give you a few pointers. First of all, even though the technology is largely global as well, well, you might find the same Apple computer in the UK as in France as in China, even though there are local varieties and they are adapted to specific keyboard requirements, etc. But let's say that technology is globally assumed to be the same. However, it didn't develop necessarily in the same in all countries. A less and less known part of French history is that, in fact, it has created the first digital communication network before the internet, and it was very popular in France. It was called the Minitel. Some of you might have heard about it, or your parents, or if you are older than 20 years old, perhaps when you were in France, you might have seen this strange looking little device in French homes. In fact, it was working. The system was working up till 2012, but it was like say a mini computer which could do a certain number of things. You could connect to say sites, as you would call them today, through a phone line, and you could get information, and companies were able to create these tiny simple websites, and you could find that information online. Now, so the Minitel was an amazing tool of communication which wasn't developed in any other country, and it was like a predecessor, you can say, of the internet in France, very specific to it. And of course, artists and authors, as they would do, immediately started thinking about what we could do with this tool. And from the early 80s, in fact, people created things like network novel and installations of Minitel computers in exhibitions where interactive stories would happen on various screens, and you had to link them up and you could manipulate what happens in the story. I'll come back to this interactive storytelling in a minute. But so this already existed with this pre-internet and in a way, from today's perspective, primitive digital tools. And this just to say that, in fact, artists will pick up immediately whatever appears in terms of technology. You can see this today as well. And they will play with it, and that will produce new digital or new kinds of artistic and cultural outputs. But even beyond that, so we can talk about two roads that cross today, and this will be, again, partly specific to how and what happens in France, in French culture, and partly, of course, similar things might be happening locally elsewhere, or are happening. So one of the roads in which these developments happen is precisely the kind of literary and artistic experimentation with the new tools I just mentioned about the Minitel, and that keeps going. So whenever you have mobile phones, as soon as mobile phones and touchscreen appeared, artists started thinking about how can we tell a story by using the fact that people using their phones will be touching their phones. So you're not just flipping pages of a book, but you can interact with the touch screen. For instance, you might have seen such stories on your tablet or phone. And the other thing that is very important is it's not just artists and authors anymore who will be publishing things that other people can see, as it happened before, when you had to pass through a book publisher in order to publish a book and get to be read. Now anyone can put their writing or their ideas, their inventions, their digital inventions or artwork online, and anyone can see it. Of course, you have to make sure that people will find it, but that's another question. It can be there and people can come across it. This has created what we call participatory culture. Anyone can do it and everyone can contribute it and anyone can see it. If you think about it, this is, again, a very radical change compared to when publishers decided what is good and what is not good, and there were specific institutions who were in a way shaping what people would get in terms of culture. Now it's all kind of enmeshed in the spaces where we are present in our everyday. So out of this come new literary forms, because all the inventivity of everyone in a way can be invested and presented and found, and an entirely new reading and writing culture. The fact that anyone can write means that many more people will try it. Some of you might have heard or use or write on Wattpad, for instance, this website for mainly fan fiction, where often young people just write their stories because they feel like writing stories. And some of them become published authors. But even if they don't, their stories are there. They might not have been, or they would have not been seen just 10 years ago, because there was not one platform like this. There were blogs, but again, it's a different form. So just to come back, what might be French in this? So two things to mention here is that French authors began experimenting with computers very early as in the 70s. So as soon as the first still expensive, very expensive personal computers appeared, there were a few French authors, and I mention it in a minute, who started playing with it and thinking, okay, what can we do with language here, and how can we produce something interesting in terms of literature? And the other thing is French literary history influenced the development of digital literature. Of course, especially what the French did, but also beyond that. So authors such as Raymond Queneau, who's a very playful poet and author with many literary playful inventions, wrote a poem called 100 000 milliards de poèmes, 100,000 billion poems in 1961. And this is a book published in this form. You can see the photo there. So it's a set of 14 line sonnets, where each line appears on a cut up slip of paper, as you can see, and you can flip them through, and whichever order you flip the individual lines, they will still give you a readable poem that makes sense. So it's a combinatory logic to a poem, basically. So even though he wrote only, I think it was 10 times 14 lines, if you start varying and recombining them, you can end up with as many as 100,000 billion poems. So this sort of thing could much more easily be done, of course, with computers. Let's see in what other ways have computers make us reinvent literature. Again, we can't do a real discussion, but just give a thought of what is a text for you. What is it that you call a text as a basis? I would assume that you would say things like it's a set of sentences lined up that make some sort of sense. It can be shorter or longer, etc. Now, what a text is questioned and can be rethought based on text generators, such as the one created by Jean-Pierre Balp, who is precisely the person who started experimenting since the 70s, and he's still active. I won't show you the link, but you will be able to see the slide just to gain time. Un monde incertain, an uncertain world, is a whole world created by generated texts. Jean-Pierre Balp has been refining his text generator since the 70s, basically, and he draws materials from the web and has created rules which allow his machine, his algorithms, to create texts. So if you click on that link, you will see a page where each time you click, it's a different text that appears, and the text that you're seeing will never be seen and read by anyone again. And you will notice that it's a strange thing because it somehow makes sense and it doesn't make sense. It's grammatically correct, and you can see sort of pictures coming up. I mean, mental pictures, but you can't quite put it together because when a human person writes a text, of course there is some sort of a coherence. It goes somewhere. There is some meaning coming out of it. Whereas in these text generators, it's up to the reader to try to look for a meaning behind it all. So the question arises here, who is the author and what is the role of the author, since it's done by a machine? And what is the role of the reader, since it's the charge is given to the reader to create a meaning? So what is a text is questioned by this new digital way, not so new anymore because it's been 40, 50 years now, of text generators. The next question we can ask is, what is poetry? What would you call poetry? According to one famous definition, is a text where the lines don't go to the end of the page. It doesn't go quite to the margin. It's famously difficult to define, but you will think perhaps of things like the expression of the feeling of a person in an aestheticized language, etc. Now, if you look at this example, and this is why I wanted to share my screen, and hopefully you will see it, the proposition de voyage temporel. Oops, it disappeared. All right. Proposition de voyage temporel dans l'infinité d'un instant. So proposition of travel, of time travel. Oops, I don't know why this is disappearing. Proposition of time travel into the infinity of an instant. See what happens. This is a poem. To spend time, perdre son temps, to waste or lose someone's time. Le passer à le regarder passer. To spend your time just to watch time passing. And if you notice here, you can see the date of today, 29th of April, Wednesday in French. And what it says at the bottom of the page is that, oops, what happened here? Can you see my screen? What you can see here is that this poem will only ever appear to any reader who can see it. So each time that you regenerate or refresh the page, it starts again, and tomorrow it will show a different date. So again, this is not exactly a poem in the sense that we are used to, but it is. But it is considered as a digital poem because it makes you think of what language is, what time is, and for what reasons we are using, we are writing and reading poems, to spend time and to feel time and to think about things in the world. Something strange is happening with my PowerPoint here, but the last question would have been, what is a story? What is it that you imagine a story or a novel or fiction? Usually, again, you might think of novels, films, and how would they tell you a story from A to Z, from some intrigue, from some question to the solution. Now, again, with the web, we see, and with digital technology, we see things like interactive fiction. You probably have met some of this kind of fictions when, if you play video games, it is in a way interactive fiction because you are part of a fictional world where you do things, and the way you act your avatar acts through you will define how the story evolves. Now, this can be for entertainment. It can also have more of a literary purpose, or more of a more worked through language, say. And again, I put an example here, which I won't be able to show. This is Loss of Grasp by Serge Bouchardon and Vincent Fauquer. It is translated into English, so you might want to check it out. And if you see the screenshot that I put here, what happens here is that the poem moves, and the way the lines change again, the meaning of the letter, it's a love letter, changes from being a love letter to being a breakup letter. So this kind of dynamics wouldn't be possible, obviously, on a page, on a printed page. So the way stories can be told changes entirely, because it can be not one story, but many stories or different kinds of stories that you see in one go.
Erika, sorry to interrupt. I'm just very conscious of the time, and we've had lots of really, really good questions. So maybe could you wrap up in 2-3 minutes? Would that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks very much. I'm sorry.
So just no problem. I'm conscious also of the time, and I just wanted to show a few examples. So obviously, this kind of development continues, and today what we see is new phenomena appearing in social media. You can again check out these examples which I included on Facebook, Instagram, where we have a kind of an animated bande dessinée comics. Or on YouTube, you've got authors who use the form of the video to both do literature and write text, but embedded in a video as a new form of literary expression. So these are just a few pointers, and what you can take away from it is, well, the main thing is that yes, there is digital culture. Yes, culture, society, and technology are deeply intertwined. It's not the same thing. If you read in a book, you probably experienced it, or we see things on a screen. But it's not only not the same thing because you're not holding a book and it's not material, etc. But because different things can be done with technology. So it has introduced radically new forms and modes of producing culture. It is now part of culture, and how culture is done. You are part of it, and you are contributing to it, or you might be contributing to it in some way. You are building also this large network, and of course it's not only in English. So what happens on the web in French is now part of what we call French culture, or German, or Spanish culture, and you cannot just continue looking at books to try to understand what's going on in France as a country. If you want to understand the culture of today, you will have to think of these as well. So that's just a few pointers, and sorry if I went over a little bit of time. And at the end of the slides, you have both Cyrille's references and my references, a few more pointers. So I just hand the screen back to Sasha. You got it?
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks very much, Erika. Thanks both Cyrille and Erika. I think that was really, really fascinating. And also two very different angles on French studies, and two very different ways of looking at culture within French studies. Now, Chris, do we have any questions?
Hello. Yeah. Yeah, we have some questions, and I'm going to try and get them up on the slides. Let's see. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and we can ask them as well. Let's see. Can you see that okay? We're not working yet.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can see that.
Great.
Okay. So I guess there's a few questions for me there at the beginning. So Alison is asking, what's happening in France under COVID-19? Well, at the minute, the state is actually preventing people from giving the kiss, okay, from giving a bisou or une bise to friends, okay, and even shaking hands is not recommended, okay. Well, technically you should not see your friends anyway, because we're in complete lockdown, okay. But the question is really interesting for after. What's going to happen? And to be completely honest, people are starting to think that we may actually have to shake hands or just say hi a little bit like you do in England, rather than just give hugs or kiss on the cheek, okay? How do you know how many kisses to give? Well, I've given you the map, Emily. Hopefully it will help, okay? Do French people just memorize the map? Technically, we also make mistakes, okay? Sometimes you go for a second kiss and you realize, no, this one only was expecting one. Or you want to stop at 2 and then the person goes for a third one. It is cause for embarrassment, okay? Not huge embarrassment, but a little bit, okay? I'm being honest with you there, Emily, okay? Chaz is asking, there's a stereotype that smoking is still widespread in France despite health warnings. Is that still true? Yes and no, Chaz. Meaning that French people were renowned for smoking and practically everyone used to smoke, okay? That's completely true. Okay, because you could smoke in offices, you could smoke outside the school. For example, when I was a student in college, we could smoke. Technically, I think we could actually smoke within, not inside the building, but just outside near the door. Not a problem. We did not need to leave the premises of the school. Things have changed, okay, mainly for economical reason, because the government wanting to influence people into not smoking, have decided to raise the price hugely, okay? Not just a little. I remember when I was, well, so that's about 30 years ago, a packet of cigarettes used to be only £1, okay? And now I think last time I saw, it was more or less £6.50. So the inflation is quite huge on tobacco. Also, tobacco has been very unpopular on media. Okay, we used to have guys like Serge Gainsbourg or Jacques Dutronc smoking everywhere they went. Okay, Dutronc with a cigar and Gainsbourg with his Gauloise blonde. Okay, things have changed completely now. Since 1993 and the loi against tobacco, okay, I think it was the loi Evin, you're not allowed to smoke in public places. You're not allowed to advertise smoking, which means, for example, in Formula One, the Ayrton Senna, the pilot of Formula One, who was renowned to be on Marlboro sponsored car, so you had the little red triangle. Basically, in France, the car only had the triangle. They were not allowed to write Marlboro on it. Okay, so all that has helped to diminish a little bit the influence of cigarette. Okay. And finally, is it true that literary written or spoken French are very different? Ooh. I can guess that this comes from a sixth form student, probably. That's a very good question. It is a little bit, it is true, not a little bit, but it is completely true. For example, the way we use the historic past, okay, le passé simple, in writing mostly and hardly ever in speaking. That is true. For example, in writing, you would always put your double negative. You would put your ne pas, je ne suis pas. Whereas in speaking, sometimes you may end up saying, which is not correct French, by the way, je suis pas. Okay, you should not say that, but we do it sometimes. Okay, just like, for example, après que, the word après que, which, as if you are learning French, you know, is not followed by the subjunctive, whereas avant que is followed by the subjunctive. Après que, in speaking, a lot of people, including myself sometimes, I'm being honest with you there, we do use sometimes the subjunctive. In writing, no. Okay, so basically, it's not that the French is different. It's just that we take more care because, well, we're leaving a trace, really. That's why. Okay, are there any more questions, Chris? Either for me or Erika?
I think that was all for you for now.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Cyrille.
Okay, perfect.
If anyone has any more for Cyrille, feel free to put them in the chat. We don't have very many yet, specifically for Erika, but I had a question actually, and I was wondering if it seems that digital culture is very American, and maybe linking to what Cyrille was talking about stereotypes, I always had the impression that the French like to do things in a French way, so I wondered if there's any resistance within France to the Americanness of digital culture.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's a good question, linking back to the stereotypes as well. Well, I don't know if there is resistance in particular to the Americanness of digital culture. It is true that we both have this well, generally have this idea that digital culture is very American, and of course the internet and the World Wide Web was invented by the Americans, and that's where it started spreading from. So inevitably there is something of that. And the language of the web was for a long time primarily English. It's still to a large extent English, because even if you have French and friends in different countries, you don't necessarily speak the same language, and English is the most spoken language generally in the world. So it ends up falling back onto English, which of course reinforces that original influence. But at the same time, that's what I try to draw out, is that the French do keep doing things in their own way, or keep doing things that they don't want to do, that they do want to do, sorry. So the heritage, the cultural heritage in a way that they have from literature, and the way they conceive or question language does produce their own kinds of things. And in fact, when I said that French literature has influenced digital literature, that's beyond French digital literature. So even in the American tradition, there are things such as Queneau, the 100,000, what was it? 100 million, whatever poems, I always confuse the title. That is very much cited even by American combinatory poetics, or whoever experiments with such technologies, poetry that uses the combinatorial potentials of language. And other French authors also have become very influential, not only in France but beyond its border. And Jean-Pierre Balp, the author I cited, or Serge Bouchardon, the one who did the interactive fiction, they have an influence beyond France. So it goes both ways, in fact. So just as you would see in a way with novels, print novels, influences go both ways, even though linguistic barriers obviously remain. So it would be those who have some sort of an insight and the ability of reading the language that would be advertising or promoting these materials in the other countries. So that's a bit of a complex answer, I suppose. I don't know if it gives a full answer, but I'm not sure it can be much more simplified without killing it in a way.
Thanks very much, Erika. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. Nothing is there in the chat. Is there anyone else who'd like to come in?
Well, fantastic. Well, in that case, I would say let's say thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Cyrille, and thank you to Erika. Thanks a lot to Chris for monitoring the chat and doing the Q&A. And thanks to all of you for coming. We've had up to 105 people, which is absolutely amazing. I think we're really chuffed that there's so much interest in languages and cultures. Please do join us again next week for our German seminar. Again, 2 members of staff from German will be doing something similar related to German studies. Same time,